We are not here today to debate whether Mikhail Gorbachev was a man of impact. He undeniably was. But we are here to unmask the nature of that impact. The defense will present a shining vision of a democratic hero, a selfless dismantler of the Soviet Empire. I will present a different truth, a man who was, at heart, a light dictator, a master of the slow retreat. He did not choose to dismantle the system, he clung to it desperately, only offering reforms, perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness, as a survival tactic for the Communist Party, not for the Soviet people. He maintained the party's monopoly on power until the very end, using force in Tbilisi, Baku, and Vilnius. His openness was a release valve, not a commitment to freedom. His restructuring was a failure. The charge is not failure, Judge, the charge is hypocrisy, cloaking the iron fist of authoritarian power in the soft velvet glove of liberalism. We will prove that he was not a reformer who failed, but a system man who simply ran out of moves.
Attempts to judge the dawn by the standards of high noon. This is a gross distortion of history. Mikhail Gorbachev inherited a terminally ill totalitarian empire, a state built on fear, secrecy, and global aggression. Was he a light dictator? Nonsense. Dictators do not release political prisoners. Dictators do not remove the Communist Party's constitutional monopoly on power, Article 6 in 1990. Dictators do not stand by while the entire edifice of their control crumbles through freedom of speech. His reforms, glasnost in particular, were not a mere survival tactic, they were a deliberate, high-risk introduction of liberty into a system designed to crush it. The use of force in the Baltic states was a tragic, contradictory failure, yes, but it must be weighed against his greatest achievement. He refused to use the full power of the Red Army, the ultimate iron fist, to save his own regime and prevent the breakup of the USSR. That refusal, unique in Soviet history, saved Europe from potential catastrophe and confirms his true legacy, a bold, tragic reformer who chose the path of peace and freedom over the bloody preservation of power.
Gorbachev released the iron fist. But until March 1990, Article 6 of the Soviet Constitution enshrined the Communist Party's sole right to rule. Mr. Gorbachev was General Secretary for 5 years before agreeing to abolish this article. Even after, he created the office of President of the USSR for himself, granting him sweeping executive powers that were essentially a continuation of the General Secretary's supreme authority, not a submission to democratic checks and balances. He consolidated personal power under a new title. How is this the behavior of a genuine democrat?
Focuses on legalistic dates while ignoring the seismic cultural shift. My evidence is the return of political dissident Andrei Sakharov from internal exile. This was not a survival tactic, it was a fundamental signal that the rules of the Soviet game had changed forever. Glasnost allowed the press to criticize party corruption, exposed Stalin's crimes, and ultimately gave the national republics the voice they needed to demand independence. The fact that the system he led could not survive this openness is the greatest proof that his reforms were fundamentally revolutionary and democratic in nature. A dictator who cloaks authoritarianism does not willingly empower the very voices that will sign his political death warrant.
He had peaceful intent, but the record is stained with blood. Tbilisi, 1989. Baku, 1990. And the most egregious example, Vilnius, January 1991. Soviet troops attacked the television tower, killing 14 unarmed civilians. While Gorbachev officially denied ordering the specific action, the troops were under Soviet command and the entire event was a direct result of his attempt to use coercive force to stop independence movements. This is the iron fist revealed, a dictator willing to kill his own citizens to preserve his empire, a glaring contradiction to the claim of peaceful transition.
Let us not confuse tragic mistakes on the periphery with the fundamental core decision. In the pivotal moment of world history, when the Berlin Wall fell, Soviet troops were stationed mere miles away. When revolutions swept through Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, the Brezhnev Doctrine was officially dead, not by international pressure, but by Mikhail Gorbachev's decision. He had the power to crush the revolutions of 1989 with tanks, just as his predecessors had in 1956 and 1968. He chose not to. He voluntarily relinquished Soviet imperial control over Eastern Europe. The lives he saved by keeping the tanks in their barracks outweigh the tragedies of the limited, contradictory actions in the Baltics. This act is the ultimate evidence of his commitment to a new, non-authoritarian global order.
The man before us was a Soviet true believer who was forced to reform, not one who truly desired liberal democracy. His reforms were a calculated gamble to save the party, not free the people. He held on to power as president with an iron grip until the very last moment. And when his power was threatened by genuine democratic movements, he resorted to force, shedding blood in the periphery. His most celebrated actions, like letting the Berlin Wall fall, were driven by the pragmatic need to stop an unsustainable military and financial hemorrhage, not a noble dedication to freedom. Mikhail Gorbachev's legacy is one of unintended consequences, not democratic heroism. He was a light dictator who lacked the will to be truly brutal and the vision to be truly democratic. He was neither a committed reformer nor a successful dictator. History must find him guilty of cloaking a failed authoritarianism in the rhetoric of openness.
Condemn a man for not being a perfect prophet of democracy. That is an impossible standard for the leader of a totalitarian state. What the prosecution calls a light dictator, history calls a reformer caught between two worlds. His contradictions, the openness of Glasnost coexisting with the violence in Vilnius, were the contradictions of the Soviet Union itself, which he was the first leader to truly challenge. His legacy is defined by his restraints, not his failures. He voluntarily surrendered the military power that every Soviet leader before him had used without hesitation. He set the fire of freedom Glasnost that irrevocably melted the iron control of the party, a feat no dictator, light, or otherwise, would ever willingly accomplish. Mikhail Gorbachev was a man who chose to lose his power rather than drown his people in blood. For this unprecedented choice, history must find him not guilty of the charge of cloaked authoritarianism, but recognize him as a tragic, essential architect of peace and liberty.